Hello Year 4, and this is Monday the 25th of January, and this is your reading lesson for this week. So we're going to read through chapters 5 and 6. So it's the same, we're going to keep adding to our reading journal. Okay, so chapter 5 and chapter 6 we're going to be looking at. So a quick recap. So Fintan Fedora decided that he was going to go on an expedition in search of the rare Brazilian choco plum. His poor butler, Gribbly, has had to go with him. He's not very keen on the idea. His dad, however, thinks it's a fantastic idea because it will keep Fintan out the way while he hands over the business to his other two children. And also what's going on is that in another part of the country, Eric and his mum, Eric and Edith Bumstead, funny name, have decided, well, it's more Eric's plan, isn't it, have decided that they are going to kidnap Fintan and demand a ransom, because they want lots of money and Eric thinks he's going to be really rich if this plan goes to plan. Well, let's see. Chapter 5. A few days later, after a bit of a struggle and a lot of shoving from below, Edith Bumstead had managed to clamber up a tree just outside the grounds of Fedora Hall and was surveying the house through a pair of binoculars. "I can see him," she hissed to her son on her stolen mobile phone. "He's in that upstairs room there, the third window from the left." Eric had dragged his fat little body over the wall and was crawling commando style across the Fedora's lawns towards a large bush which had been clipped into the shape of a peacock. "Message received and understood," he hissed back, feeling very important. "Any idea how I'm going to get up there?" he added, hoping there wasn't a drain pipe he'd have to climb up. He was exhausted enough after scaling the garden wall. "Hang on a minute," said his mother, scanning the scene. "Yeah, over by the greenhouse, there's something that looks like a ladder. I think it's a ladder." This was encouraging news to Eric, who was now hiding behind the big peacock-shaped bush. "Okay, let me know when the coast's clear, and I'll make a dash for it." It wasn't so much a dash as an unfit waddle, but Eric did eventually make it across the rest of the lawn to the cover of the greenhouse. "Right," he hissed down the phone line. "This is it. I'm going in." He dragged the ladder to the house as stealthily as possible and quietly leaned it up against Fintan's window. Inside Fedora Hall, preparations for the great Brazilian trip were almost complete. "Are you sure you have your passport, Master Fintan?" asked Gribbly for the third time. "Quite sure, thanks," said Fintan proudly. "It's right here on my dressing table, ready to go. How about yourself? All packed?" "Indeed, sir. I have just double-checked the list. We have all our camping equipment, clothing, boots, cooking utensils, first aid kits, medicines, mosquito nets, repair kits, maps, compass, travel documents, foreign currency, and air tickets. You need only be sure you have your own personal items and passport, sir. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be carrying our things to the car." Fintan was thoroughly excited. This was even better than the school coach trip he had taken to the Welsh mountains, and with any luck would be less of a disaster too. He still denied rolling the coach's spare wheel down a mountain, and anyway, it wasn't so much the lost wheel that had annoyed the mountain rescue team, but the 7 hours they had spent looking for Fintan, who went to get it back. Luckily, this time they weren't going in a coach, and Fintan had been banned from helping with anything mechanical. "Do you think I should leave a window open while we're away?" called Fintan from his bedroom, "to keep the room aired?" "I don't think that will be necessary, sir," replied Gribbly, who was busy hauling a heavy rucksack down the stairs. "I suppose you're right, Gribbly. It's a bit chilly, actually." Having just flung his bedroom window wide open and immediately shut it again, Fintan managed to miss two quite interesting things. First, he failed to see the horrified expression on the face of the little fat man clinging to a ladder as it was tipped over backwards. Secondly, he didn't hear the terrifying crashing of glass as the man disappeared through the roof of his mum's greenhouse and into her cacti collection. He did hear a few muffled howls of pain, but thought he must be imagining it. Right then, we're all set, he said happily, rubbing his hands together with anticipation. Let's hit the road. A few minutes of farewells followed, during which Finton's father shook his hand manfully and his mother fussed and made sure he'd packed plenty of vests. Felicity and Flavian strolled over to offer a last few minutes sarcastic comments. Look at that, sniggered Flavian, the great explorer heading off to certain disaster. Gribbly finished strapping the luggage to the roof rack of the big old black car that they'd been lent for the journey, then did a final check that Finton hadn't forgotten anything. Luckily, the only things he'd forgotten were his passport and his rucksack, so it didn't take long to go back for them. As the car pulled away with Gribbly at the wheel, Finton's parents waved cheerily and his siblings pulled stupid faces. So we're all off then, beamed Finton. He happily unfolded the enormous map he'd brought along, elbowing Gribbly in the head and causing him to knock over an ornamental flower pot and take a clunk out of the peacock-shaped bush. What on earth's going on? Demanded Mrs. Bumstead, climbing down from her tree branch when her bedraggled son came limping back towards her. Why didn't you get him? I just saw him driving off with his butler. You let him get away? Eric wasn't in the mood for arguing. He wasn't in the mood for much else either, but managed to haul himself back over the wall and hobbled back to their parked car. Hurry up, shouted Edith, getting into the passenger seat. We can catch up with them if you get a move on. Eric carefully picked a few large chunks of broken glass from his coat sleeves. Then he took his place behind the wheel. The roar of agony that followed was loud enough to crack one of the car's wing mirrors and steam up Mrs. Bumstead's glasses. Gritting his teeth, Eric leapt up and removed the huge spiky cactus from the seat of his trousers, then hurled it out of the window. What did you bring that thing for? Hollered Edith. Stop wasting time and start driving, will you? With a spinning of tyres, a grinding of gears, and the gnashing of Eric's teeth, the Bumsteads eventually headed off in hot pursuit. Half a mile ahead, Finton was attempting to refold the enormous map, which he had just discovered was of North Africa, so wasn't of much use for the drive to the airport. For some reason he couldn't fathom it wouldn't fold quite as neatly as it should, so he ended up with a sort of large lumpy thing crumpled into a ball. Fancy a sandwich yet, Gribbs? He said happily, tossing the map back into the back seat and unzipping his rucksack. No, thank you, sir. I believe I can just last a little longer, said Gribbly coldly. Finton failed to notice the disapproving tone and produced a large peanut butter sandwich from an enormous pile he had stuffed into his bag. Suit yourself, then. I'm famished. The fact that they had eaten an enormous farewell roast dinner not long before leaving home made Gribbly doubt this statement, but he said nothing. Besides, he had become distracted by the sight in his rear-view mirror, a tatty little yellow car weaving around behind them. It appeared to be in a serious hurry and was trying desperately to pass. Quick, this is your chance, bellowed Edith as they came to an empty stretch of road with nothing but fields on either side. Pull in front of him, and you've got him trapped. Eric, grinned like a madman, put his foot down and started accelerating past the black car in front. It was at that very moment that Finton produced a flask from his rucksack and unscrewed the top. How about a nice cup of tea, then? He asked, offering it to Gribbly and spilling at least a cupworth into his lap. Gribbly let out a scream and took his hands off the steering wheel. The inside of the car suddenly descended into frenzied chaos. Finton started apologising profusely for his clumsiness while attempting to mop up the mess with his hanky and spilling the rest of the tea onto the windscreen and his own shoes. Gribbly was desperately trying to escape from his painfully hot, soaking wet trousers and to see through the cloud of steam issuing from them. The car veered out of control across the road directly into the path of the Bumstead's little yellow car, forcing Eric to swerve sharply to the right off the road through a wooden fence and into a field. Eric and Edith screamed in terror as their car bounced and skidded deep in a sloppy wet manure. A flock of startled chickens flapped into the air. Eric slammed on his brakes and juddered to a standstill. A couple of the chickens, which had found their way in through an open window, fluttered and clucked and added to the already thick layer of dung coating the inside of the car. How could they have known? Shouted Edith after a few seconds of shocked silence. How did they know about the plan? Eric scraped a handful of dung and chicken feathers from his face and scowled. This was getting serious. This rich kid wasn't the easy target he'd been expecting. The events of the last half hour now seemed to indicate that young Fintan Fedora was no ordinary kid. If anything, he was some sort of brilliant assassin. Just sit there sulking, yelled his mother, wiping the mess from her glasses. Get after him! If they know about the plan, we can't let them get to the police. Eric revved the rattling engine, switched on his bent windscreen wipers and drove their battered little car unsteadily back onto the road. The Fedora's big black car was still just about visible in the distance, driving off as if nothing had happened. As far as Fintan and Gribbly knew, nothing had happened. In the chaos, they'd forgotten all about the yellow car behind them. I'm really, really sorry, Gribbs, Fintan was saying as they drove towards the airport. I promise I'll be more careful from now on. Gribbly didn't reply. They hadn't even left the country yet, and he was already having serious regrets about the whole trip. So that was chapter 5 then. You can see that Eric and Edith Bumstead think that Fintan Fedora knows that they're onto him. But little do they know, they don't. They're none the wiser, are they? It's just Fintan seems to get into lots of crazy scrapes and trouble, and somehow these crazy scrapes are protecting him from Edith and Eric Bumstead, the evil kidnappers. Alright, so let's see what happens in chapter 6. 2 hours later, Gribbly found himself in the gents' toilet at the airport, knocking on a locked cubicle door. Master Fedora, sir, are you all right in there? We must really be hurrying along if we are to catch our flight. After a long pause and some nervous coughing, Fintan's small voice was heard from within. Yes, of course, I'll be out in a minute. There was a further pause as Fintan decided that he couldn't hide in there all day and that maybe he'd better tell the truth. Actually, I'm not feeling particularly keen about going on a plane. At the moment, Gribbly, I don't suppose we could sort of, go on a ship or something, could we? Gribbly had been expecting this. He knew very well about Fintan's fear of flying and had been wondering how long it would take for him to back out of the journey. The boy had only ever been on a plane once before in his life, which had turned out to be a traumatic experience for him. It had also been a terrifying experience for the pilot and the rest of the passengers, mostly because Fintan had smuggled a cat and several guinea pigs on board, which had escaped and chased each other up and down the plane for 3 hours. You do realise a sea voyage would take rather longer than an aeroplane, sir. It would be a matter of several days, said Gribbly. Oh, that wouldn't be a problem, Gribbs, said Fintan from behind the door, suddenly sounding much chirpier. It would be nice, I expect, relaxing, bit of sea air and all that. Very well, sighed Gribbly reluctantly. I will make the necessary arrangements. Before disappearing into the toilet, Fintan had spent a short time queuing nervously at the Brazil Airlines check-in desk. His state of mind hadn't been helped by the arrival of a very nasty-looking, skinny old woman and a strange little fat man who smelled of manure and had cactus spines sticking out of his face. Well, we can guess who that is, can't we? For some reason, they had both stared intently at him, as if they knew, and worse still, just trying to pause it. Sorry about that yr4, just had to pause a second. So where were we? So for some reason they had both stared intently at him, as if they knew him, and worse still, as if they wanted to kill him. They had then watched him like hawks as he had nervously made his way to the loo, and he was pretty sure they had followed him there as well. Gribbly had noticed them too, loitering awkwardly outside the toilets and shouting at each other. When he had gone to check on Fintan, they had stopped arguing and begun whistling very badly as he passed. Strange people. They were still there and had resumed their arguing through gritted teeth. Well, go on then, get in there and do something, said Edith, jabbing her son in the ribs. This is our last chance. If they get on that plane, we'll lose them. Eric wasn't quite ready to abandon all his hopes for gold-plated taps in the shape of swans, but he was a bit reluctant to be caught attempting a kidnap in such a public place. Don't be daft, Mother, he hissed. We can't just grab him with all these people around. Someone will notice. We need a clever plan. At that moment, something looking a bit like a clever plan walked right past them in the form of 2 airline cabin crew members. "That's it," said Eric, excited at his own cunning brilliance. "A disguise! We need to get uniforms like those people. Then we can pretend we need to check the boy's passport or something. No one will suspect a thing. We ask him to come with us and bang, we've got him." Edith found herself surprisingly impressed by this idea, mostly because she fancied wearing something which didn't stink quite so much of manure. "Yeah," she said, with a sudden burst of excitement. "Uniforms! We need uniforms!" Grinning broadly with their nasty yellow teeth, Edith and Eric abandoned their post outside the toilet door and began following the unsuspecting cabin crew. Moments later, Gribbly and much happier-looking Finton emerged from the gents with their suitcases, left the airport and headed for the coast. Finton and Gribbly arrived at the Southampton docks without further incident, apart from almost colliding with a lorry load of peaches while driving on the wrong side of the road, and then going through a red traffic light and narrowly missing a minibus full of football supporters who had shouted some very rude words. Things had improved considerably when Gribbly had finally persuaded Finton to sit in the back seat and to stop interfering with the steering wheel. Their ship, the Magnifico, was an impressively huge shiny white thing with hundreds of cabins, 7 restaurants, 3 swimming pools and a cinema. "This is a much better way to travel than by a rotten old aeroplane," thought Finton as he was shown to his cabin by a polite man in a smart white uniform. It had all the comforts he could possibly want and a few more he hadn't even thought of. This was a lot like being at home, except with the sea all around them. In fact, it was even better than being at home because his disapproving parents and his irritating older brother and annoying older sister weren't around to pick on him. "If there's anything I can do for you, sir, please don't hesitate to ask," said the man in the white uniform. Finton grinned like a kid in a sweet shop. "Brilliant," he said. "Can I have a peanut butter sandwich, please?" A much less enthusiastic Gribbly was also shown into the cabin, where he piled up their enormous stack of luggage, sat on his bunk and prepared himself for several miserable days of seasickness. Poor old Gribbly. So it seems that Finton has managed to foil the Bumstead's plan again. So by sheer luck, he's managed to escape. Right, so we'll leave it there for now. So chapter 5 and chapter 6. Okay, bye for now, year 4.